Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel Update for August 31st through September 6th, 2025. The crazy times continue, and this week I'm a little bit behind on my homework, so we're going to be a little bit shorter today, but overall there have been quite a few developments this week, so let's go ahead and start with global strategic concerns. This week I have begun the shift to get spun up on Venezuela and that entire Caribbean conflict. Right up front, I don't know if we're actually going to go to war with Venezuela proper and try to topple Maduro and do what a lot of people seem very interested in doing right now, or if we're just going to keep shwacking boats out there in the Caribbean Sea for the time being. In either case, there's not really a whole lot the American people can do but watch and be prepared for any kind of retaliation on the home front. Like I wrote in The Wire a few days ago, it's important to remember in the world of counterterrorism that there are different motivations for someone being a terrorist, so I know that the mainstream media and a lot of think tanks and whatnot are going to make it seem like we're going to have the Central American version of Al-Qaeda pop up on American soil. I'm not so convinced on that at the moment because most of what we've seen so far from really any kind of enterprise in South and Central America is that they are criminal enterprises. They are financially motivated. They're not ideologically motivated. Yeah, a lot of times they may be willing to stand and fight and engage in warfare that might get them killed, right? They may do that. That's kind of how the cartels operate, but you don't tend to see a whole lot of TDA guys strapping on special vests, if you know what I mean, and walking around in society. That doesn't tend to be the option taken there. So, not to say that there won't be an increased risk here in the United States over the next few days and weeks and months. There absolutely will be. Ever since TDA was flagged as a foreign terrorist organization, it was kind of on like Donkey Kong, so to speak, at that moment. But how it's actually going to work out is probably going to look a lot different than the counterinsurgency, Islamic-based terrorist kind of activity that we saw in the Middle East, right? Everybody has counterinsurgency on the brain and they think that everyone's going to be Al-Qaeda, where in actuality, you're probably just going to have a very large intensification and continuation of the conflict that's already going on in South and Central America. We're talking skirmishes, we're talking territory gang wars, turf wars, things like that. And you may have one or two big attacks, but for the most part, it's going to remain low level unless Venezuela, the government side of things, get involved. And even then, I guess we're just going to have to wait and see how this works out. So we'll get more into that in a minute. Moving around the world, the situation in the United Kingdom is tenuous at best. The Axe-Girl situation and scandal continues, as the two people who were always from the very start alleged to have been harassing these girls were arrested for harassment and assault. So we'll get more into that later, but we knew it at the time. Axe-Girl is vindicated, and this has now become a much bigger issue than just what we thought it was in the beginning. This is an important scandal to be aware of, mostly because it's a good barometer for measuring how the British people are faring these days. And dissent is getting pretty hot, so Starmer's government is probably on its last legs. We always say that, right? Well, when there's a fairly controversial politician in office, but this may actually result in the beginning of the end, especially when it comes to things like cabinet positions being shuffled around, and that sort of thing is a pretty good indicator for the survivability of a current narrative and political party. So, of course, it's not this one event that has led to this. It's just one of the many final straws that keep being stacked on top of the camel, right? So the situation coming to light and it developing the way that it did. Yeah, this sort of stuff happens to kids all over the world, especially in the Western world, a lot, every single day. And it's a complicated thing, but the media lying about it from the very, very get-go, and Police Scotland being very, very biased in their investigation process, that's the sort of thing that's going to stick and make people continue to be angry. So we'll have to see how it works out, but we'll get more into it later on. And finally, big picture stuff, the international relations between the United States and India are not doing so well following the recent defense summit, I guess is how you would phrase it, in China between most BRICS nations. Again, this is very big picture stuff, and the United States has kind of taken a big stick approach to things like trade and tariffs with most countries on Earth, but this is something to watch out because India has a very, very big stake in the United States. If the United States were to cut off trade to Tanzania, nobody cares, right? It doesn't really have any impact on stuff. But if Trump actually follows through on his claim to potentially stop tech companies from outsourcing their IT support to India, that can have very wide-ranging impacts. I know that a lot of people are very, very excited about the potential for reducing that sort of relationship, but the United States is probably not very likely to just sever relations with India, but what is quite clear is that India has made their choice, and they continue to make their choice, in terms of national policy being aligned with China and Russia. Can't really blame them, but they also can't play both sides of the fence. They can't be a critical American ally in the region, right, and also be cozied up in terms of trade with our national adversaries. Whether it's right or wrong doesn't really matter. That's the way it is in the world. You kind of got to pick the Western world side of things or the post-Soviet world. So India doing things like this, little political spats back and forth, it's deteriorating, and India would probably be very wise to reconsider their actions in terms of trade. But that's kind of out of the realm of what I'm really concerned with at the moment, which is strategic movement. So here is the infamous slide once again. So once again, the United States has deployed 10 F-35s, half of a U.S. Air Force squadron of F-35s to Puerto Rico to do things. They haven't really said, but the general assumption is that these aircraft are here for taking on Venezuelan aircraft. Venezuela has Su-30s, and they've got a few F-16s, which are getting kind of old, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But generally speaking, you don't need F-35 to be taking out a fast boat that's being run by cartel dudes or whatever. So that's the general assumption there, and that's probably how things are going to work out. I'm going to continue monitoring to see if there's anything else. Right now, I'm seeing what we might call a plethora of staging being done in Florida. There's been a lot of movement there, so some might call that indications and warnings. Some might call it a bluff. I don't know. Right now, the White House is batting 0 for the number of times they have bluffed with military hardware. But again, Maduro is the kind of guy that you kind of have to bluff, right? He's a Soviet hard power kind of guy, right? So if the United States is trying to bully Maduro into doing what we want, as in probably the oil reserves there, this is the kind of thing that you would expect to see. However, this is also, again, like all of the other deployments we've seen in the past couple of months, this is exactly what you'd see if we're going to try to start blowing stuff up in Venezuela. So will they or won't they start going for a regime change operation in Venezuela? I don't know, but probably at this point. I'm just going off of that assumption, which is why I'm doing the IPB for Venezuela. But anyway, we'll continue to develop this out and see if we can get some products pre-prepared and pre-staged, just in case things get a little spicy. Right now, you can't say that it's a training mission anymore, right? This is actually a combat mission because they've killed 11 people. So for everyone out there who thinks that this is a bluff, remember, this bluff has already killed people. So it's already a combat operation. Hostilities have already commenced. The big question is, are we going to transition those hostilities into taking on more military targets in Venezuela? It's one thing to take out a fast boat with a single missile, but it's another thing entirely to send some high-level bombers to crater the runways of, a dozen different airfields. That's a pretty big escalation of force. Are we going to get there? I don't know. But either way, we're going to find out probably pretty soon. So before we get deeper into Venezuela, I wanted to mention one thing that happened in the United States this week, which has gotten very little press coverage in the mainstream media, and I thought that this was a very, very pertinent thing to be aware of, especially as the threats to Christian churches continues here in the United States. And like clockwork, exactly what everybody thought and everybody said, there was another attack planned. Thankfully, this one was prevented, but there was another attack planned after the Minneapolis shooting. One individual, identified as Joshua Michael Richardson, was arrested a couple of days ago for planning a mass shooting at St. Michael's Abbey in California. Now, this is an interesting case because this is one of the very few times where the individual was actually apprehended before the attack took place. And here's how that worked out. So Richardson, as you can see from this screenshot of a video that he posted online, is probably the craziest dude you're going to see on the internet this week. Very strongly mentally ill. He called himself the Angel of Death and there was very much a mental illness factor to this. Of course, there's always that mental illness factor to all of this, but this dude was seriously out there, so that's kind of what we're dealing with here. He was not a transgender shooter, as you might expect, but this dude was absolutely a whole bag of crazy. So he traveled from Alabama all the way to California and was staking out the church beforehand, before the attack, and he actually spoke to the priest at the church and told the priest that he was going to commit the attack. So that's how we know about this. That's how we were able to stop it. And it turns out it was the Orange County Sheriff's Office who apprehended this guy and charged him with terrorism, right? So the FBI is not involved. FBI had no idea this dude was doing all this, even though he has an extensive online record threatening violence against this church. and really some more ideological things too. So that's why I threw this graphic on the screen here to remind everyone of the cycle of a terror attack. So this guy had actually worked through all of the steps, most of the steps, and he was actually transitioning from the rehearsal of the attack into the execution phase of the attack. So he was moving into the later stages right before he committed the attack. And if he had not given his hand away, he probably would have been very successful. So this dude had found the target, he had conducted surveillance, he had actually narrowed down and figured out which church he wanted to target. He conducted surveillance of the church ahead of time on the internet. Then he moved into the planning stages of his attack by moving from Alabama to California to stage for the attack. And he actually visited the church a couple of times before conducting the attack to do a pre-attack reconnaissance, right? So this is definitely some critical information to be aware of when it comes to attack prevention and being aware of how these things are often planned. So definitely keep the church in your prayers and keep the priest in your prayers as well. How often we forget to pray for our own priests, right? They've definitely got a very, very tough job, and in this case, he was in the right place at the right time. So stay vigilant, stay aware, and do the best you can, right? So that's it for the United States. Let's move over to Venezuela. And I'm sorry, I'm a little bit behind on my homework. I'm not a Venezuela expert. I don't really know a whole lot about this type of conflict that we may be engaging in. So I'm rapidly trying to get caught up here. And one of the very first steps is basic IPB, right? So I'm working through that right now. You can see these maps and the KMZs that I've started to upload to all of my various platforms, such as ArcGIS, and I've got some KMZs that I'm going to be dropping very soon on GitHub as usual. So for those of you who like to run ATAC and kind of peek around in ATAC at this sort of thing. But most pressingly, right, when we're doing IPB, we have to realize that work expands to fill the time allotted. And if we don't have a lot of time, we can't do a lot of work, right? So one of the things I'm trying to focus on first, since time is of the essence, is Venezuela's aircraft. If war were to break out, these aircraft will have to be neutralized first, or they will probably be involved in some kind of shoot-down incident. So if we look into our crystal ball and try to assess how this war might get started, that's probably how it's going to go. And Venezuela makes it fairly easy for us because their F-16s are held at one base and their Su-30s are held at another. So these are the two bases that I am watching, and I'm going to try to develop out a little further just in case. Now, they can forward deploy. They can move around their aircraft to other air bases, but Venezuela's infrastructure has been crumbling for many, many years now. So if they move aircraft and they start dispersing, we call this dispersing their aircraft to other airfields so that we don't whack them all at once, we'll know fairly quickly because there's really no way to hide these things. I mean, they can try, but the places where they can land an aircraft, at least very easily without carving a new airfield into the jungle, which they have done, but the places where they're likely to move aircraft in the next couple of days are fairly well surveilled, so Venezuela doesn't really have a chance at hiding most of their military hardware. And, you know, as we can see from this video that was posted on social media the other day, they've got their own dudes videoing the inside of their major naval bases, showing off their hardware, and we can geolocate exactly where these boats are located. So it's not to say that Venezuela is a completely and utterly pathetic military. I mean, compared to the United States, it's not really a contest, but still, you want to be aware of these kinds of things. War is pretty tough, right? And even if you're going up against dudes in caves in the mountains, right? Well, you know, we don't want to get too cocky here, right? Again, I don't know what's going to happen, but that's why we prepare, right? And a lot of these products take a very long time to make. So front-loading that effort, just in case things pop off, would probably be very helpful, because Venezuela is not a small country. They're a pretty big country down there, so there's a lot that can happen. We're going to do our best to try to figure this out. Plus, there's also a lot of American civilians in Venezuela, believe it or not, so, but we'll have to see how that goes and develop that out and continue making products. So that's it for Venezuela. Let's move over to the UK and wrap things up with the Dundee Axe Girl situation. Vindication is the name of the game now, as it has become quite clear that Scotland police were sitting on the medical records which showed that the girl who claimed that she was assaulted was admitted to the emergency department with a concussion. So we have actually a medical diagnosis of an assault taking place. Very interesting detail that a lot of people kind of ignored when this story kind of broke out, but Anyway, the guy who was arrested is Fatus Ali Dumana, who was identified as the mysterious Bulgarian man. It was originally the story that they were married. They were a married couple, and a lot of mainstream news media, I think even the BBC is still saying that they're married. I don't know about that. I mean, it's not like I can look on marriage licenses, right? So, I don't know. It could be one of those rather unsavory situations, but either way, don't have any definitive story on that. But this is the photo that the mainstream media is running with. It looks like such a wholesome family, isn't it? Turns out, once they released the guy's name, everybody found him on social media and found out that even though this is what the mainstream media is showing you, this is what this dude posted on his own social media page. So this is what we might call a primary source. This is straight from the horse's mouth. These are the kind of photos this dude is posting, referencing himself as a gypsy gangster man. Now, of course, this is Instagram, so it's Instagram, but still, you get a little bit more context from this as opposed to the wholesome family picnic photo that the media has been running with. And there's also a lot of ways to do a link analysis to develop out this network, such as this gentleman's gangster uncle, as he says, from Bulgaria, as the flag emoji denotes. So plenty of people on this guy's account to check out. If it's still up, I highly doubt that it is. Plenty of tattoo analysis to be done to check for known gang signs and gang affiliations. And yeah, this is a lot different from the story that every authority and the mainstream media in the UK was running with, and this does not look very good in terms of keeping people calmed down. So I know that a lot of people immediately knew that this was the case. A lot of people saw the video and immediately did what most people do and used a gut assessment to figure out who was the bad guy in the situation. People are going to be really angry, not necessarily because of the attack itself, which is unfortunately tragically common. They're going to be more upset probably with the idea that this cover-up occurred and that it was so incredibly easy to identify this guy and find out that this dude is the one who's in the wrong, right? Police Scotland really did get involved in this situation and saw a video of a girl screaming and pleading for this dude to leave her alone, and she was trying to defend herself, and they sided with this guy. That was their gut instinct. My guess is that now that this dude's social media and his actual name have somehow made it to the internet, we're about to find out everything there is to know about this dude and anybody else he might be linked to. So some good news, some bad news. The guy who was actually the aggressor here in this situation has actually been detained by Police Scotland, which tells you how much dirt they have to have on this guy. If they're going to actually arrest a Bulgarian migrant, this dude must have done some atrocious stuff here. They must have like a lot of evidence on this guy for them to arrest him, because that's just how things work in the UK. I mean, it's a good thing he's being questioned and treated as the aggressor now, but we have to remember the girl is still facing weapons charges, so she's probably not going to wiggle out of that unless some sort of public outcry and public outrage highlights how ridiculous this is. I don't know. We'll have to see. Hopefully we can keep some eyes on this and actually, let a kid not be thrown in jail for trying to defend themselves from this guy, right? That's ridiculous, but the British system is fairly ridiculous right now, as is our own here in the US a lot of the time. But anyway, we'll see how it works out. We'll keep eyes on it. I'm going to keep watching this and do what I can to start developing out these networks once again. A lot of work, but it's worth it. So that's all I have for today. Let's roll things up with the intercepted GhostNet reports. I was able to get on the net this week. Despite the rather challenging weather conditions, it's still good to exchange information in a more off-grid manner. I know it gets kind of tiring. It's not the most entertaining thing in the world, but this stuff is important. The very moment that you realize, hey, I need a handheld radio, that's the time where you probably can't get one, right? So radio is one of those ultra prepper kind of topics, right? Because you really do have to prepare and learn and set things up and test things out and keep things going. It's a perishable skill, but there's a lot of work involved for sure. And it is growing. So this week I'm going to be dropping some more code plugs for those of you who wish to engage in the line of sight options for the GhostNet. A lot of people asked for the incorporation of something like a national calling frequency or something like that for those who just have the classic Baofangs, which is perfectly fine. A lot of people don't have the time or resources to set up this expensive HF stuff. So having something rather than nothing is helpful, even though it's astronomically unlikely to be used nationally, right? Line of sight stuff doesn't go far, right? You might get a couple of miles of range, but it's still good to have a common frequency to use if you so choose. So I'm working through some code plugs to just make it easier for everybody to use. You can still, the GhostNet still has the frequencies there. So for those of you who plugged in the frequencies already for the line of sight options, you don't need to change anything. I'm just going to start offering the code plugs myself, so that you can load it right into Chirp, or you can load it right into some of the more fancy radios these days. You can definitely do so a little bit easier. So I know I haven't updated the GhostNet in a while, but I've got some changes. I'm working on it. It just takes me time, right? I know I say that every week, but still the same thing. But anyway, that's all I've got for this week. Thank you guys all for your support. Thank you for watching. I couldn't do any of this without your support, and it really does keep things going. So thank you to all of you on Patreon who make that possible, and thanks to all the rest of you who just watch and engage and find this stuff to be useful. It really does help. So thanks again, and I will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.